Welcome. Thank you all for being here. If you're here for the event, for the award ceremony, please do have a seat. I'm David Bradford. I'm a poet and translator here in town, literary organizer. I've been programming here with BlueMet for a number of years. We're so thrilled to be presenting the Blue Metropolis First People Literary Prize to Cree and Metis poet Duncan Mercredi. But before we go any further, we wish to acknowledge that the Blue Metropolis Festival operates on Indigenous lands. The Ganingahaga Nation are recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters of the territory on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it is home to a diverse Indigenous population as well as other people. I'd like to add that as a settler, writer, and organizer who does work all over this territory, but also across Turtle Island, land acknowledgements like this one are important, but they're also small, symbolic gestures, ones I think settlers and settler organizations should invite as prompts to consider more tangible, material actions we can take as we critically encounter our presence and context in these lands. Something to consider. Now, a bit about the First People Literary Prize. Each edition of the Blue Metropolis Festival includes Indigenous Literatures and Voices programming, which works to showcase the richness of Indigenous literatures and to feature leading and emerging Indigenous authors, artists, and thinkers. Just one example, immediately after this event at 2:30 in the space downstairs, multidisciplinary Mohawk artist Escawanati will present The Peacemaker Returns, her sci-fi retelling of the Haudenosaunee Confederation story, something that I think is certainly not to be missed. Our moderator for the day will also be moderating a conversation with the artist. But returning to the prize, this has always been a cornerstone of the Indigenous programming we do here at Blue Metropolis. Created 6 years ago now, the prize aims to increase national and international visibility of writers from Indigenous communities, be they novelists, nonfiction writers, poets, playwrights. Previous winners of the prize include Marianne Hart Baker, Thomas King, David Troyer, Lee Maracle, Therese Marie Maillot, Richard Van Camp, and most recently, Eden Robinson. The prize is also proudly presented in partnership with Indigenous Voices Awards, a frequent collaborator here for BlueMet, an organization that aims to support, nurture, and celebrate the diversity and complexity of literary production of Indigenous writers working in lands claimed by Canada. We're hugely thankful to the IVAs for the opportunity to pursue this work together. Thank you. So, next, the prize. I'd like to invite our moderator up on stage, translator and Indigenous Studies settler scholar Sarah Henzi, to present the award to our 2023 laureate of the First People Literary Prize, Duncan Mercredi.
I think we kind of merge. Sorry, we're a bit disorganized. So thanks, David. Where did he go? Here he is. Sorry. So I'll just present Duncan, and then we will get to the fun stuff. Duncan Mercredi is a Cree Métis poet, writer, storyteller from Mississippi. Can you hear me now? Whoa. Okay, so Duncan Mercredi is a Cree Métis poet, writer, storyteller from Mississippi, Grand Rapids, and grew up listening to his grandmother's stories. He has published 4 poetry collections, including Spirit of the Wolf, Raise Your Voice, and The Duke of Windsor, Wolf Sings the Blues. His work has appeared in countless anthologies and periodicals, most recently a collection spanning from his earliest work to recent unpublished poems, Mahikan Ka Aunut, The Poetry of Duncan Mercredi, edited by Métis scholar Warren Carriou. He is co-founder of Winnipeg's Indigenous Writers Collective and has been a mentor, supporter, and uncle to generations of Indigenous writers. Welcome. Not sure how to do these things anymore. I will merge here. It's those COVID calories. I think we have to use these. Hello? Okay.
Done? Is it on?
It's on.
Okay.
And actually, as of that list of works, there was the other one there that I hope he'll tell us a little bit about. But I wanted to start with a quote by Warren. A blue-collar guy in a white-collar world, well, he quotes this from you, sorry. Blue-collar guy in a white-collar world, living in a tie-dyed neighborhood, writing in broken English, dreaming in Cree. In a concrete forest, my skin a chameleon of colors, from a whiter shade of red. In spring to the dark brown of summer, to the earth tones of fall, and then the darker shade of white in winter, and you ask me why are you confused? Can you tell us a little bit more about the writing in English and the dreaming in Cree?
Well, I guess it comes back to the probably in the early 60s when Manitoba Hydro finally decided to invade our country, our territory, and they brought in a new language that was foreign to us, which is English. Because when we grew up in Grand Rapids in the 50s, we all spoke Cree, and English was very, very rarely used except at the school. But the difference with a lot of the schools that we hear about is that the teachers there were actually not too bad. And we were allowed to speak our language outside of the school. Inside the school, we couldn't. We had to speak English. But once we got outside to play in the recess time, we were more than happy to be able to use our language there, because that's what we grew up with. And in fact, that there was times when we played outside, we spoke nothing but Cree, and we would run inside, and the teachers would tell us to come in because the recess was over. And once we got them, well, we're no children then. Once they get inside, I mean, they're not quiet. They're going to make all kinds of racket before they sit down. And every so often, the teachers would forget their own rule, which was a tik squat tapi, you know, I mean, settle down, settle down. But they would say it in Cree, you know. So of course the kids would all go, "Ha ha, you're speaking Cree," you know. So they would realize that, but that happened as before that, when, especially with the old people, my grandmother, my kokum, they expected the teachers that came in to see all the elders, and I don't use the elders very often. To me, just an old person. Okay. When people refer to me as an elder, I just tell them I'm not an elder. I don't know that much. Okay, I'm just old. Okay, that's it. I'm old. Don't call me an elder. So, if you ask me for advice, I'll probably give you the wrong advice. And but with the old people that were there, when the new teachers would come in, they were expected to visit all the old people, the grandmothers, the grandfathers. They had to go and visit them, and what would happen at the time is, especially with my kokum, she was very, very strict in that part of it, is that if you came to visit her and you couldn't speak the language, you better have an interpreter with you, because she wouldn't talk to you if you couldn't talk to her language. And so the interpreter would be there, and she would talk to the interpreter. If the teacher asked a question, she would have to direct it at the interpreter, and the interpreter would interpret it, and my grandmother would answer it to her, and then the interpreter would then talk to the teacher. She would never face or talk or put her eyes on the interpreter at all. I mean, onto the visitor. Not saying she ignored her, but she would not talk to her. And eventually the teachers realized, well, if we want to talk to this woman, we better learn the language. Because my Kukum spoke Cree, that was it. She never spoke English in her life. And that's where I learned that idea from that. In order to reach people that didn't speak the language, I had to write in the language that they could understand, which was English. But being Cree, and we kind of a little sneaky once in a while, I have included my language with some of the pieces I write. But I don't tell people exactly what they mean. You know, if you want to know exactly what I'm talking about, then you better find out yourself, okay? Because I'm not going to tell you. And so that's, and I'm continuing to do that more and more. So, but like I say, what the hell, I really don't give a shit, right? Excuse me, I still have that blue-collar attitude, okay? I worked in the blue-collar world for over 20 years. I worked in bush camps after hydro, and I worked with all kinds of people, and I picked up a lot of their habits without. In fact, people say, well, when my dad would, when me and my dad would talk, which was very rare at the time, when I spoke Cree with him, he said, you speak Cree like a white man. Yeah, so. I can't help it. I'm surrounded by white people when I'm in the camps, and I'm the only Nietzsche guy there. Oh, by the way, Nietzsche is just a slang term, my partner, right? My partner, my buddy, my Nietzsche. And being that only Nietzsche person in that camp full of white people, you will acquire some of their habits. But it wasn't that bad, you know. It wasn't that bad. I mean, to me, it was just a learning process for me to understand other people that weren't the same as me. I needed to understand them to survive, and without losing touch of who I was. And it's not that easy, you know, because it's. I'm talking over 25 years with that, working in a place like that. So. And then I thought I escaped and walked into the white-collar world. No, it's no different. I always tell people white-collar people are just blue-collar guys that don't know how to speak. You know, they don't know how to speak that blue-collar language, but they pretend anyway. So I do make fun of people quite a bit. So
that's fine. Okay. So I was just thinking, because in our exchanges, and you talked a lot about how you go to visit classes and do events for youth. What inspires you to do that, and what kind of things do you share with young people or kids?
I learned to tell stories from my Kukum. My Kukum was a storyteller in my family. And part of the storyteller is not just the telling stories for amusement and to make the children laugh. Part of that stories were lessons that we had to learn. And so the stories would go from one of laughter, one of seriousness, on how to treat people, how to behave when guests came in. Not so much a protocol, just what was expected. One of those things that we were taught of is that when a stranger came into the house, they would always go to the oldest person in the house. They always greeted them first, which is my Kukum. And so they would say hi to her. Wache. Wache is an old Cree word. It means hello. And so they would go to her, and then they would then go to each person inside the house and say the same thing to them. Each person would be greeted individually with a wache. And that included the babies. If babies were born, they were also greeted in that fashion. They would be said wache to them by the visitor. And I always asked my Kukum, the first time I saw that happen, I asked my Kukum, why does he talk to somebody that doesn't know how to talk yet? And she said, well, she'll remember. She'll remember that word. She's just a baby does not mean that she can't remember that word. She'll always remember that word. And that's why they do it. And so when I go to schools now, the first thing I say to the students is "Wachi," and I expect them to say it back to me. And I'll say it as often as I can until they respond. You know, it might take me 15 times to say "Wachi" to them, but eventually they'll start. And every time I go visit them now, they'll say "Wachi" right away. And so it's just it's just a way to let them know I'm just here to share stories. I'm just here to share stories, that's it. And what do I share? As much as I can. As much as I can. Sometimes the teachers will be a little bit shocked at what I will share with the students. But they invited me. You know, they invited me. I have every reason to tell them whatever I want. And if they don't like it, don't invite me again. You know, that's all there is. Because that's how I was raised. My cookum told stories. Didn't matter what the stories were about. If they were adult themed, you're there, you listen. Okay, and so that's just the way it is. Yeah.
Do you ever get in trouble?
I haven't been invited to a couple of schools.
Is there a loss?
Well, yeah, but the funny part is the place I was not, the two places I was not invited to actually had a lot of Indigenous students in there. For some reason, the parents were a little upset that the stories I was telling was not what the children should be hearing. And well, that was like it. That was that's what they believed. So what am I going to say? No, what am I going to say?
Which brings me, I guess, to that new collection. I wonder if you could tell us about it. I just found out about it before, so.
I wrote this when they started, when they first discovered the 215 unmarked graves for children. I started writing pieces. There was so much denial happening out there, and so I started writing pieces about it, and I didn't know what to do with it. I submitted to a couple of places. The publishers did not want to touch it because of what was written in there. And so the Winnipeg Arts Council, which was hired me to be the poet laureate for the couple of years that ended up being 3 years, I asked them if they would publish it, and they said, sure, we'll do it. So they did it for us, and that's what this is about. It's about the lost children, they call it. And I just call it 215, because 215 was the first number that came out. And when I started writing it, the words that came out the first was, when the earth opened her heart, the stars in the sky wept. And so that's where that came from. And my mother was a residential school survivor. She spent 8 years in Brandon, and she was raised in Nelson House. That's where she was born. So for her to get to Brandon, they would have to canoe from Nelson House on the Burntwood River to the Paw, catch a train to go to Brandon. She was there for 4 years before she was allowed to go home. So she spent the 4 full years in Brandon. Then she went home for 2 months and then sent back again for another 4 years. And she half days of school. She was 8 years old, and she was tasked with looking after the smaller kids because she was used to looking after smaller kids. And she was there with her brother, he was 9 years old, and my auntie was 5 years old. And when she was doing that, they realized that she was a really good worker, so they hired her out to the houses in Brandon to clean houses when she was 9 years old. You know, and that was her half-day work, half a day of school. And that was for the eight years that she was there. And so when we asked her once, I said, well, what did you learn? She learned, I learned how to clean houses. You know, she finally got her high school graduation when she was 65 years old. No, she went back to school to get that. So. She also taught me to love books. And she let me read everything, including the Confessions magazines that they used to have. Maybe you guys are too young to remember that. But that was and then she told me, she didn't really talk about the residential schools, except some of the stuff that she went through. But she also became a very heavy drinker later on in life, especially after we lost our older sister. And that's when the stories would start to come out. The brutality that existed in those schools. And all of that was just part of what she shared with me, but she didn't share it with everybody else. It was just basically just me and her talking late at night, popping open her bottle, you know. And eventually she would just fall asleep. And she says, I don't know how many people I lost when she was at school. I don't know how many children I lost she took care of. They would just disappear. They would be gone, and they didn't know where. And so I started remembering all those stories and that, and the one thing she said was, when she talked about that, was she said, when I was born, I was given a name. When I was 5, I was given a number. It was to be my new name. And when I faded away from where I was, I became a faded memory. When my tears were finally found, I still did not have the name I was born with. The number I became was lost over time. Many cried. I sit here in a shadow with no name, no number. I listen, a statue falls, a man posts. We do not tolerate violence or vandalism. My scars have become dust, my tears have evaporated. I was real once. I had a name. Maybe I should have been a statue. You know, and I remember that part was I once had a name. You know, she didn't have a name, she had a number. They were identified by their numbers, not by their name when they were at school. You know, number 2, answer. That was it. And kind of struck me kind of weird though. It's just, you know, it's just, how could we do this to people? You know, and we talked about that over and over time, and you have to understand in my family we had quite the dynamics in my family, because my mom is a full-blood Cree from Nelson House. My dad was Métis with a Cree, French, Irish, and Scottish background, who had enlisted in the Second World War, but he couldn't enlist as a Métis person because Métis people were not allowed to join the army because they were still considered enemies of the state because of Louis Riel. So when he went to enlist, they asked him his name, and they asked him what he was, and basically just said he was half-breed, and they said, well, we can't have you that way, so we're going to make you French, because your last name's got a French name. So he was listed as a French Canadian. So, and but he was not recognized as a human being until 1950. He didn't get everything that all the soldiers that went to Second World War that received. We didn't get that quarter section of land. We didn't get that last $2,000 that they were given. He got $386 for the last check that he received. And we didn't know all this until we dug around inside the house and we found his old duffel bag with all his army stuff in there. And that's when we found out his enlistment papers, realizing that he had no identity. He had no identity. He was a non-person. And the dynamics that happened within that house was amazing. The battles between my mother and my father, his making fun of her because she never got a high school education, to having a grade 4 education, and her coming back at him saying, "Well, you joined the enemy to fight," you know, and so that was the dynamic. I mean, that was what that's what I experienced as a boy, seeing all of that. But we survived. We survived. With a hell of a trip, I tell you. Right. I will tell you this, when the hydro got there, I'll tell you, the changes happened so fast. We were a community of 400 people before hydro got there. Within 2 years, there was 2,000 people there. We lost our language. We lost our livelihood. We could no longer hunt, trap, or fish. Fishing was gone for 15 years because of the dam. The hunting area that we used to use was completely flooded out. Our traditional areas that each family had were lost. And yet somehow we managed to continue living not as we always did, because it was just impossible. And seeing all those changes happen within 2 years, from the time I was 10 years old to I was 12 years old, seeing all those things happen. By the time I was 13 years old, I was drinking. And I was drinking heavy. And I drank for 2 years till I was 15 years old, just about every weekend. And the only thing that saved my ass was leaving Grand Rapids when I was 16 years old to go to high school. Because most of my friends are dead. Most of them either died drunk or died in jail. And the only thing I've never forgiven hydro was for that. You know, I mean, it gave my dad a job, you know, but we lost something in between. You know, we lost part of our culture. We lost part of our language. It took us a long time to regain that language. So, yeah, I'm a little bitter. Just a tad, though. Just a tad. Yeah. So, what else?
I was going to ask you, but there's hope also, right?
Hmm?
There's bitterness, but there's hope.
Oh yeah.
You work
Oh
with
yeah.
kids.
There's always hope. Yeah.
And so I was wondering, what are you working on right now? You know that one of my favorite things to ask you is about the COVID project that you have on Facebook. I love reading your posts. Yeah, like what are the new things that you're working on or that inspire you?
I've got a stack of papers in my writing room that's sort of scattered all over the place. I'm going to have to go shift through them. I wrote a piece called "The City is Red." It's about Winnipeg, and it's a long, long piece. It continues on. It's on journey, and so I want to gather all of that, and I want to have that published as just by itself. But the city is red, and then I've got enough material for probably about three books of poetry. And people keep asking, "What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with all those pieces?" And I said, "I'm going to go traditional." I told him. He says, "What do you mean? What are you going to do traditional?" He says, "I'm going to gather everything I've ever written. I'm going to roll them up in nice, tight bundles, make them like little logs, and I'm going to save them. And when I die, I'm going to tell people, I want you to put those on the sacred fire, for the 4-day sacred fire." And he says, "Why?" "I want to send them back. I want to send those words back where they came from. You know, I want to send them back." And somebody said, "Well, that's a waste." I said, "Nobody touches them anyway." So, So a lot of my stuff is quite, I guess would be annoying or piss off a lot of people because I really don't beat around the bush, okay? I really don't beat around the bush. I have to tell the truth as I see it. I can't be bothered with other people's feelings about what I believe. And yet I can continue learning from other people. And I wrote a piece about that saying, when somebody asked me once, where do you get your writing from? Where do you get your ideas from? And I said, I've worked with many nationalities in my lifetime, and both in the blue-collar world and also in the white-collar world. And I've learned from all of them. I've learned from everybody. See, I don't shut my mind to what people are telling me. I open it up so I can take what they're saying and see how does it affect me as an individual, and what can I say to them to make their ideas change their minds. You know, because if you can't have that dialogue, it's just going to continue on. Right now, we're a very divided country. We are a divided country. You know, we're no better than the States. And until we can sit and talk to each other in a manner that we want to understand each other, we're not going to get anywhere. You know. And where do we start? We start with the children. We start with the children. What I have found when I've doing a lot of storytelling with the kids is that by the time they're 13 years old, their minds are made up of what people are like. By the time they're 13 years old, they've already acquired everything that their parents have given them. All their beliefs, all their prejudices, everything that they don't like. They've taken that and they're taking it part of it. By the time you're 13 years old, it's too late. If you can't get to them before they're 13 years old, forget it. Forget it. They've already made up their minds. So that's just the way it is. So I write as much as I can. And I share it on Facebook because I know nobody else wants to touch it.
Well, I mean, I was just thinking when you were, like, I was a pest when I was 13. But I think if I was a 13-year-old today and had access to Facebook and could read those snippets, I find it interesting to kind of use these different kinds of new media rather than, you know, the traditional way of publishing and so on and so forth. But then there's that question of, well, what about the copyright? Because you're sending them out there, not in the way, like you were saying before, the bundle, but you're still putting it out there like on a public platform.
This is what my Kukum told me when she would tell stories, was that, see, once you put it out there, it's no longer yours. It's no longer yours. You're giving it away. He says, you can't ask for it back. It's already out there. So for you to give it away, that's like giving somebody some food and saying, well, I changed my mind, I want to take that food back. I don't care who uses it. It's not mine anymore. No. I guess I could use it as when my Kukum was the woman that let people into the house no matter what their reputation was. And she would let them come in. She would feed them, and they would sit and they would talk, and then they would leave. And my mother, not being raised in that kind of a tradition, was always upset about that, the fact that she would just let people in to come and share food with them. And she says, well, why do you do that? And she would say, well, it's because it's what we do. It's what we do. We don't expect something back that you've shared. You don't expect it back. Because if you didn't want it back, or if you wanted it back, you wouldn't share it. So what's the point? You know, maybe they'll change, I don't know, but I don't care. She would say, I don't care if they change or not, but they will sit and come and talk to me. That's all I care about, the fact that they will come back and talk to me. That was a big thing for her. Yeah.
And then we drag you all the way to Montreal.
And then you drag me all the way up here, yeah. Yeah. I finally found a fast food joint over there I can actually eat at. I'm sorry if I can't pronounce it. If I can't pronounce it, I can't eat it. so.
Well, yeah, it's just an anecdote. There's an article by Kiwi Martin who talks about Inuit literature and harvesting literature the way you harvest food, and then going and visiting and sharing stories and sharing food. Like it's essentially stories become a form of sustenance as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's what it is, and I think it's a chance to start a dialogue with people that might not read Indigenous materials, and a lot of people will shy away from it. Even a lot of the people I used to work with, well, being blue-collar guys, I mean, to them anybody that write poetry is just not quite right. Okay, so. I had to have a lot of girlfriends to prove I was okay. All right, but that's the way it was. That's how they thought, and they wouldn't read the stuff I wrote. They wouldn't. But others did, and to me that was a big thing. At least others did. I wasn't there to try and make their minds up on what they're supposed to do or how they're supposed to believe. I was there to work. I was there to work. And I had to prove to them I could work. And I proved that for 25 years, because every time somebody new came along and said, well, what's this Indian doing here? Is he going to quit again in a couple of weeks? I outlasted them all. I outlasted them all, I tell you. I still got the scars to prove it.
I'm just checking our time. We're still good. Did you want to read us anything?
I want to I want to talk to you a little bit about this piece I'm going to do. When I was a boy, we had a chief in Grand Rapids, Indian Act chief, we called him. But the thing in the village in Grand Rapids when I was a boy is that the women had control. They were the leaders. They were the leaders in the community. Chief was just there for show. That was it. All the decisions made for the village were made by the women. If he wanted advice, he went to the woman. If he didn't like the advice, well, that was too bad. He was always outvoted anyway. And so eventually you had to do all that. When Hydro got there, the men started to realize it was the men that made the decisions. And so our world got turned upside down. We stopped listening to the women. And when we stopped listening to the women, the village went slowly down. It was no longer the same village as when I was a boy. And I started thinking about that last year when I wrote this piece, and I thought, I have to do something to raise their voice again. I have to tell people, this is what I know about the women. These are the women that raised me. My dad was there, but he never gave me advice. All the advice I got, I came from the women. My mother, my grandmother, my aunties, and all the women in that village of Grand Rapids, Metropolis. That's the ones that gave me that, the advice. And I lost it for a long time. Being a guy, we don't listen all the time. And but in my 30s, I started to realize I'm missing something here. And I went back to that idea. Okay, well, I have to seek advice. And most of the advice I've given over the years, they've been given over the years. Most of the best advice came from women. Most of the bad advice came from the men. That's why we always get drunk. I was a hard-working guy. We did a lot of work. So I wrote this piece. I'm going to get up here and use that one, okay? Now, this piece has been, I've changed it a little bit. It's going to be on a CD. I had a musician working on this. And it's actually voiced by a woman a musician. But I changed it a little bit to make my voice heard on this piece. When she speaks, her voice sounds like thunder. Seeking solace in sadness, hoping drink will erase the grief. And it echoes, echoes, shaking your faith on the ground you stand in. When she cries, sounds like thunder. The weight she carries makes her tremble. She shakes. She shakes. The rattle she holds, no one answers her prayer. When she sings, sounds like thunder. A whisper, Mum. Dragging that memory from her soul, she dances that ache away. When her feet touch the ground, the hearse sounds like thunder. Echoes, 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 echoes. When she speaks, sounds like thunder. When she cries, sounds like thunder. When she sings, sounds like thunder. When she dances, sounds like thunder. And that's for all the women that have raised me.
That was beautiful. I think I could maybe invite people if someone has a question or two, if anybody's curious. I can go on, but is there anybody who would like to ask a question? Oh, okay.
Wajia. So my question is really when you talk about the bundles, I'm curious about them because you said that you want to bundle them and put them into the sacred fire. What about us who are still here waiting for the bundles? Why send them to the ancestors? Because there are still people waiting for those bundles. So
Well,
that's my
I
question.
think it's, for me, it was the, when I realized what I was writing was actually hitting people, but they also didn't want it published. Okay, so I figured, well, these are words that come from somewhere else. These are not mine. And when people ask me, where do your words come from, besides all the people I've met, I call them ghosts. They're ghosts inside me. These are ghosts of the voices of my grandmother, voices of the people I knew that passed on. And when we put them away, we always have that 4-day fire. And we put the logs on there to let that smoke take them away. And because these pieces doesn't seem to hit what I hoped they would hit, I realized I have to take them with me. I have to take them with me.
What if there are other people that are waiting for them? So anyways, those are the questions that I ask myself too. So.
Well, But it's good. It's good. That's a good question, though, because I ask myself that all the time too. I'm very much a how would you call it? I've walked away from a lot of traditions. Okay, I walked away from the church when I was a boy, when I realized that the priest kneeling in front of me wasn't asking me to bless. He wanted something else. Okay, I walked away from the church. I walked away from people that wanted to teach things that I didn't agree with. And then when I go to ceremonies now, I go there mostly for the companionship as opposed to what the ceremonies represent. Because the ceremonies have been stolen, mixed in. I call it ceremonies these days. I call them beef stew ceremonies. You know, because they put everything in there. You know, to be a Sundance should be a Sundance run by the community. Now, when you go to a Sundance, it's run by different nations, and they all kind of put it together in one pot. And the way I was raised when I was a boy, even though traditions or ceremonies were actually very kept quiet away from the children, so they wouldn't blab, but you can't keep the kids quiet. And church still has a lot of power in the 50s. And the way my cookum always said was that when you go to their ceremony, you do their ceremony. You don't put yours in there. So when they come to ours, we show them ours, and they won't intrude. They will respect the way you do the ceremonies. They don't try and interject by saying, well, this is how it's supposed to be done. And so, but when I go to ceremonies now these days, I can see other cultures, other traditions, other First Nations coming in to do ceremonies that should be left within that village, that community. So I don't get invited to ceremonies very often.
Thanks.
Cheers. Anybody else? Yeah, I'll get back to you in a second, I remember.
I'm interested in knowing what compelled you to write poems or to be a writer. Not everyone is a writer, so I'm just interested in your process.
I was, even though I was a silent, not said out loud as a boy, my grandmother was teaching me how to be a storyteller. She was raising me to be that storyteller. And she also told me that when you start doing this, you're going to be doing it in a different way than I am. And I didn't know what she was talking about at the time. And then when I started writing when I went to high school, because I missed home for the first year. Okay. So I started writing to get that loneliness out. And I just realized, okay, this is what she meant for me to share. I had to become a writer, but without losing that part of you that was a traditional storyteller. But I fought it for a long time. I did not want to be that storyteller. I did not want to be that writer. And finally, my wife said, enough. You have to start. And my wife is a woman. And when she told me I had to start. Okay? And that's when I started. And I was about 35, 36 years old at the time before I started. So, but it took me quite a few. I didn't realize I was missing something in my life until I was until the fourth book came out, the poetry, my fourth book came out, and I realized I was getting bored. I wasn't happy with what I was doing, and I didn't know why. I didn't know what was missing. And then my wife, who was a teacher, retired now, told me one day, he says, I want you to come to the school and do some storytelling with the kids. I said, well, I don't do that. And so she told the principal called me and says, well, look, we're just going to find you a book to read for the kids. This is all we're talking about. It's Love to Read month in February, right? So everybody that's supposed to be a writer comes in and does all this. And So they invited me, and I figured, okay, well, I'll do it. No, I'll do it. Because they gave me a book a friend of mine had written to read. So I went there. Room full of kids in a library. There's 2 readers in front of me. First reader gets up there, does the reading. Kids are getting restless already. Second read comes up. I mean, the kids are trying to sneak out the door. Teachers are trying to herd them back. And so I figured, holy shit, I'm in trouble. And so finally I get up there and in front of the kids, and they're all kind of looking at me, and I guess not seeing an Indigenous person in front of them in a long time. But the first 2 readers were white guys. And so they sat down pretty quietly, and they gave me a book that my friend had. And this little girl sitting in front of me, and she looks up and she goes, "Ha! I read that book last night." So I was lost. There was no way I was going to get through that session. And it's true. I started reading the book, and the kids are scattered. They were taken off all over the place. The teachers are having a hard time getting them back to where they were supposed to be. So I figured, well, this is not working. This is not working. This is just mayhem in the house, in that class. So I put the book down, and I started telling a story. I just started telling them a story, and they all came back. They all came back to sit and listen to the story. And I realized it was because I was talking to them. I was talking to them. I was not reading a book. I was talking to the children. And they sat there until I was finished, and they all said, "Tell us another one." Then I had to make up something else. So, and that's when the storytelling started again. And that's when I realized that's what I was missing. That's part of what I was missing. So they were doing the stories, and in time, the writing came back. But the writing is something I always love to do. So.
Yeah. Oops, sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Are you done? I think we have time for just one little extra question back here.
I'm especially curious, as a musician, I'm especially curious to know if any of your works have been made as part of song lyrics, or if you ever intentionally have written song lyrics.
I've written some songs. The CD that's got produced by this musician in Winnipeg is spoken word and also and songs. I think it's going to be out in a couple of months or something like that. He told me so. And it's part of the city's red portion of what it's going to be. So, and I can't tell you, I'm not a singer, all right? And the animals that we have live in the house know that. Because they start howling. So actually having somebody else sing the song, sing the words that I've written, was really pretty impressive. Because I didn't realize he found the music within the words. Because I wrote the words first and he put the music in after. So he actually found what I found was very raised what was written in the music. So good.
I think that's our time. But Duncan, if you're willing, and if folks want to have some work signed, we have a short period for that. At the back, you can look at some books in the bookstore. And maybe talk a tiny bit more. But thank you all so much for joining us. Sorry to make you turn around like this, a bit of a power move. But yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Sarah, of course, for the moderating. Yeah, cheers.
Can I ask it now?